Hello, everyone, and welcome back to episode 37, chapter 36 here of Almost There, a Twisted Tale novel here on Disney Magic Zach. Let's jump into it. Facilier cut around the corner of the old Cabildo, holding his hat against the fierce breeze that blew in from the river. The fog had grown thicker despite the wind. It swirled around like a dust cloud, cloaking the entire city in a dense, blinding mist that made it difficult to see more than 3 feet in front of him. The green algae had reached the French market. It swathed the open air stalls in grimy, viscous muck, forcing the vendors to abandon their wares. Celia's heart raced, blood pounding in his ears as he tried to do the impossible: outrun the shadows. He bumped into people as he dashed in and out of shop fronts, muttering curses and warning them to stay out of his way. He needed to get away from here, to find somewhere to hide. Maybe that was the key. He should just leave New Orleans, head to Chicago or Detroit, as so many of the people who once lived here had done. An anguished howl tore from his lips at the realization that it wouldn't matter. There was no escape for him, no matter where he fled. Still, he ran as fast as he could, darting around corners as he made his way through the French Quarter. He'd been trying to outrun these demons for years. The grip on his very life, was like a vice, constantly squeezing, forever demanding. Even if they collected Tiana's soul instead of his own, would he ever be free? He slipped into a narrow alley a few blocks away from his home. His eyes roamed the crumbling brick walls of the century-year-old buildings in search of the telltale nebulous blobs that had been chasing him. When he didn't see any sign of them, he released an unsteady but calming breath. He turned to exit the valley, and without warning, 3 dark shadows slithered up to him. He started, dropping his cane and then scrambling to retrieve it. Fear snatched the breath from his lungs as he took several steps back. Gentleman, he croaked. How are you? It's been a while. The 3 shapeless forms swirled around him, moaning and groaning in displeasure, reminding him what would happen on Mardi Gras night. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten about you, he assured them. The moans grew louder, coming in a rush that made it difficult for him to decipher exactly what they were saying. He heard the most important words. He was down to his final days. I'm working on it, gentlemen. China will sign that contract. You'll get your soul, I promise. He held his hands out. You know you can always count on me. The 3 shadows roared. One of them whipped around him and knocked his top hat off his head. It swooped in again, jolting Vasilier with a solid blow to his back. He stumbled to the ground and braced himself for another strike. He remained in that crouched position long after the shadows had disappeared, his body shaking with lingering panic and fear. In the decades since he'd first partnered with them, he had never witnessed such a vigilant attack. Their rage was palpable. Vasilier finally stood and straightened his clothing. He dusted off the dirt that clung to his trousers and jacket and looked around to make sure no one had witnessed his humiliation. Fortunately, the alley was empty. Except Vasilier squinted as he tried to make out the small figure he saw outlined in the murky fog. He took one step forward, then another, and another. The closer he got, the clearer the shape became. It was a small child. He stood next to a filthy pile of garbage, just outside the back door of one of the quarter's eating establishments. The young boy's ashen face was gaunt, his cheeks hollow and smudged with dirt. He picked through the rubbish, examining the rotten vegetables and table scraps with hungry eyes. This little miscreant was one of the hundreds who roamed about the city, abandoned by parents who could no longer afford to feed them, ignored by the countless people who walked past them begging in the streets. And he just borne witness to the indignity Facilier had suffered. Facilier took another step towards him. A loud crack rang out from the broken glass he'd unknowingly stepped on. The young boy's head popped up. He looked towards the sound, and their gazes connected across the mere 3 feet that now separated them. His wide, terrified eyes conveyed his panic. Facilier reached out and grabbed the child by the arm before he could run. Not so fast, he said. When the frightened gaze settled on him, Facilier was struck with an unpleasant sense of familiarity. It was uncomfortable, unwanted. As he stared into the depths of the filthy child's dark brown eyes, he couldn't help to see another child. The child sat at his mother's knee as she prepared a poultice for a sick neighbour. Even though she barely had enough to feed her own family, she had nursed a neighbour back to good health with medicinal herbs, bowls of vegetable stock, and help from the generations of ancestors who had come before her. His mind's eye calculated him several years into the future, to when that same young child had grown up into a scrawny kid who ran the streets, getting into trouble. So angry at the universe for taking his mother away far too early, he rebelled, opting for two-bit hustles in order to get ahead instead of learning the voodoo traditions his mother had practiced and tried to teach him. And ever since, he'd been digging himself deeper and deeper into debt with his friends. Facilier's head snapped back. He shook himself out of his reverie and relinquished his hold on the young boy. But before the boy could scramble away, Facilier caught him by the arm again. With his free hand, Facilier reached into his pocket and pulled out several coins. He placed them in the boy's palm and closed his tiny, dirty street fingers around the money. Go and get yourself something to eat, Facilier told him. Find a warm bed tonight. That's what this money is for, you hear me? The boy nodded, his eyes still wild with fear. And he took off down the alley, his small body quickly disappearing into the dense mist. Facilier's lips twisted into a frown as he continued to stare off into the distance. The sudden awakening of his conscience was most inconvenient. What did he care about a homeless delinquent, especially when he should have been focused entirely on finding Tiana? Facilier tilted the brim of his hat to shield his eyes and steadied himself on his cane. Moving out to the alley, he returned to the hustle and bustle of the city, easily swiping the wallet of a man in a tailor suit walking the opposite direction. That was more like it. It was time it was time for Facilier to continue his search. He would find Tiana, and he would make her pay what was due.